Welcome to Why Such a Fuss, an exciting new channel dedicated to help individuals and businesses to learn more about data protection in a way that is easy and engaging. I'm Christina from CVG Solutions, and I am a fully qualified data protection professional. I am passionate about educating, empowering, and enabling businesses to thrive. Remember to like and subscribe to this channel and help us to spread the word. Data protection is there for a reason. It protects you, your family, loved ones, customers, employees from coming to harm through the use of personal data. So make sure you click subscribe. Now, get ready to embark on a journey of growth and knowledge as we dive into the world of data protection. Julie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. I'm Julie. I'm the founder of Apuri Solutions, a chartered fellow and an accredited coach, and indeed an award winner now as well, which is absolutely amazing news. So I work with small and medium-sized businesses, really to empower the businesses through People Solutions. As Christina mentioned, for me, it's all about sharing that knowledge, the experience, and learning. It's such an essential part of what we do. So I provide day-to-day support, strategic support on people relations, all things people, and do leadership coaching as well. So Christina, did you want to give us a glimpse of what you do?
Yeah, all right, I'll do that if you really want me to. Okay. So I'm Christina, and my organization is called CVG Solutions, and we are a multi-award winning GDPR or data protection professional. Like Julie, I primarily work with small and medium-sized businesses, including charities, and I really like to see them thrive. And GDPR does that, enables them to grow. And so I love working with them. My approach is practical and hands-on, and which enables them to create solutions that are proportionate to the size and complexity of my client or the business that I work with. And so I help them to navigate the intricacy of GDPR through educating them about the subject, about the regulation, which then empowers them to make informative decisions. As they say, knowledge is power. This in turn helps them or enables them rather, to operate with a high-performing culture, which then fuels their growth. So for me, it's all about educating, empowering, and enabling. How can an organization build a culture of trust and respect when the employer is monitoring the employee's activities? So in other words, how long they spend on the PC, how many keystroke they do, how long they've been away from their desk. They could have been in meetings, who they talk to, how many times they go to the toilet, etc. How is that going to build trust? So to me, there is actually a demonstration of an immature culture within the organization, a lack of setting the right expectations of the job outcomes, of what the job needs to deliver, the lack of setting clear roles or responsibilities for each job, lack of smart objectives. I just remember that in a previous life, in a corporate world, I was working for large organizations with an international team. So my team was spread across various countries and continents. So I had the added challenge, if you want, of managing multiple time zones. So not only as a team, we were not on the same floor or buildings, we were actually physically miles and miles apart and working with different time zones. Australia was always a challenge. Now, I did not need to check how many hours their bum was on the chair or how many stroke they did. Their performance was based and measured on the outcome of what they delivered. So the quality of the work, the delivering on time, delivering to budget, if that one is a KPI. So that is how you empower your employees, but also how you hold them accountable, and therefore you then create a culture, a high-performing culture that creates trust and respect. So there was no need of monitoring. Working remotely has been around for at least 30 years, if not longer. And COVID just sort of made it even more proliferous. Yeah, so to me, having an organization that is introducing this monitoring and tracking that is so invasive, it literally demonstrates, a very immature culture, in my opinion. So they've got a bit of growing up to do, because, as I said, there are other ways, there are better ways that fuel trust and respect rather than the opposite, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And I think the challenge can be dependent on what the job role was. So in a previous life of mine, where we had a call center, and actually it was built on SLAs, response times, that turnaround of information for a customer, we did need the monitoring to a level to be able to say, actually, we're meeting our contractual targets. And whether people are answering phones, not answering phones, etc., it wasn't necessarily, and I think this is always an interesting point, and that yes, people had to put in their break times into the monitoring, but it wasn't to register the break time. It was actually so that the stats were up to date in terms of the monitoring systems of how many people were able to answer the phone.
But it's different if your job is to make calls or answer calls, then you monitor how many calls are being picked up, are being answered. Yeah. But you're not monitoring the keystroke. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. You're not monitoring how long that person is on the screen, or you're not monitoring, having the web camera of the laptop or of the desktop, watching them to make sure they're sitting on the chair.
Yeah.
So there is a different in that scenario. So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's the purpose of today, isn't it? So to depending on the situation, depending on the job type, the responsibilities, the reason for it, at some points it may be something that is required. If there are KPIs, for example, where we had service level agreements, we had to be able to demonstrate. But for the HR team that I had, no, not at all. Nothing was monitored because actually there was no need. There was no purpose, no measurement. As long as the work got done, that's the main concern. So I think this is for everyone listening. This is where we have a really interesting conversation, because you can see the difference between the data side and the people side coming through. But I think in terms of the measurements, as we said, it could be linked to KPIs, but also about health and safety considerations. Mm-hmm. So I alluded to this earlier in terms of lone working, but actually you may have to track driving times.
Yes.
If you've got someone in a courier, for example, you might need to be able to show that actually, and of course the name of it's completely gone out of my head. But
for example, lorry drivers, they can only drive a certain amount of hours and then they have to have a break and so on.
Yeah.
So but they're not necessarily being monitored in terms of, I don't know, who they talk to. So the cab, in the lorry doesn't necessarily have voice recording, for example, because that it's intrusive. So, for example, when I was working in corporates, one of the things that we were monitoring was the working hours, how many hours we were working, because for utilization purposes. So someone that wasn't fully utilized, we could then push it, move it to something else or give them something else. Also to ensure that if they were working long hours for a long period of time, we could then help them from a well-being perspective, like a duty of care. So they say, Christina, hang on, for the last 3 months you've been working 60 hours a week. What's going on? And so that again, the work could be redistributed, or it could be a sign that you need to recruit additional people. But it wasn't intrusive in the sense that it wasn't monitored. Like I said, how many keystroke, I don't know in which building I was and how long I stayed in that building, who I talked to, and so on and so forward, because that would have been, that is something else. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think that's that level, isn't it, where you can say, well, yeah, I understand why you need this information, but actually you don't need that intrusive style. I hadn't even thought for lorry drivers or couriers that actually, some organisations may track what's going on inside the cab. That automatically then brings me to the thought of, how has someone got time to listen? But that's a whole different episode.
It is.
But it's that kind of thing, isn't it? It's actually, we've shown through the working time regulations, through the health and safety considerations, that actually sometimes the monitoring is really, really valuable. But other times it's just, no, why would you do that? So, well, what happens if someone doesn't want to be tracked? I think that's kind of where we're edging with our conversation, which is absolutely fantastic. Because, of course, it does happen. It really does. And I think it's, for me, from a HR perspective, it would be sitting down with them, having the conversation and trying to understand why, what's going on to make them feel that they don't want to be tracked. Is it... And it's being curious about having that conversation of, have they had previous experiences of it? What's happened? What information do they need that potentially would help to really understand whether it was reasonable or not? And I think one of the things that came to mind is actually, we need to be really considerate with monitoring someone, for example, and especially the invasive side of it, because as humans, we all have different values, we have different importances, different perspectives that are gained throughout our entire lifetime. When I think about monitoring, if I think, well, actually, for me, do I mind being monitored? Not overly. I'd probably quite like to see the data to see what on earth I get up to most days. But for other individuals, they may potentially have PTSD with regards to monitoring, or that invasion side of it. They may have, and this is me free-flowing, that if they'd had a situation in a previous life where they've been stalked, for example, or they've had an abusive relationship, that feeling of being watched, actually that could really trigger something. So it's really important that when we've got people who are saying, actually, I'm not sure about this, we're understanding the reasons why and having that conversation, rather than just automatically thinking, oh, well, they're just being awkward, or they're just this person who they're not a company person. Because there could be so much going on for that individual that we should take into consideration. And it's really good that we're in a place where we can have those conversations. If any of you listening aren't comfortable with having those conversations, make sure you speak to your HR reps who can support and train and help and guide you on that. But it's really thinking about, okay, well, what's going on to cause this reaction? And then going from there. But Christina, from your side, What happens if someone says, well, no, don't track me?
Well, so it all depends. So if we think of, for example, my husband, okay, so he drives a company van, and the employer needs to know where he's going because they might have to redirect him to another place. So he does have, tracking mechanism in the van that sort of, tracks where he is. So, and the reason for that is, as I said, the purpose is so the organization might need to redirect him, so they need to know where he is. But another thing is to start monitor, for example, hard brakes or sharp corners, that kind of stuff. That it's much more invasive in style of driving in some instances, or it could be that another idiot on the road sort of shot in front of him and he had to brake hard. So that it's a different situation, and especially if the information there is going to be used for performance, in a performance review. So there are two different things. One is about enabling him and his organization to do the job that he needs to do. And another one, it's about the organization being invasive and being over controlling. And what we need to explore is that one of the ICO, the things that I mentioned earlier, that the ICO said is that whenever an organization is intending to do any monitoring or tracking, they need to do so within the legality. So they have to comply with GDPR. And one of the principle, or the first principle of the GDPR, is lawfulness. So that means that an organization must have a lawful basis for using, collecting, or processing any personal data. Now, there are 6, as I mentioned earlier, to choose from, and consent is one of them. And we saw earlier that consent in an employer-employee environment is not really valid. So then let's look at contractual obligation. So obviously between an employer and an employee, there is a contract, an employment contract. So is it really, so what we need to ask is it necessary to monitor and track your employee in order for the organization to fulfill the employment contract? In most cases, if in all cases, the answer is no. Okay, so let's look at legal obligations. Does the employer have any legal obligation that forces them to monitor and track? Not really. Vital interest, well, nobody's dying, so again, it's not applicable. Public interest, what would be the justification to monitor and track your employees' activity in the interest of public safety? Okay, so we could argue, thinking of my husband's scenario or a lorry scenario, that monitoring and tracking the driving performance could be in the interest of public safety. But then I would argue then and say, well, isn't that the purpose of the highway code? That's why we got one. So do we really need to monitor and track for that? So really, the only one that we have left is legitimate interest. Now, for an organization to use this lawful basis, they have to prove that the organizational interest supersedes the rights and freedom of the individual. Now, good luck with proving that your interest supersedes the rights and freedom of your employees, because privacy is a human right. And if you are at home, if you're working from home, for example, it's a private environment. From my perspective, morally and ethically, an organization should not be monitoring and tracking their employees, or not excessively. One thing, it's about if it's necessary for the organization to perform its duties, like monitoring the calls in terms of the KPIs of the calls, how quickly we respond to calls, or how many calls we take. If it's about being able to know where their drivers are so they can be redirected if necessary, that's a different thing. But monitoring in terms of an invasive kind of monitoring, that will then be used particularly for performance reviews, then to me it's more unethically, it's immoral and unethical. It leads to discrimination, and also it's, unless it's time limited, like the example I gave you earlier of the supermarket, and it's sort of strictly targeted for a specific investigation where you have suspicion of criminal activities, then it's not justifiable in my mind. I just wanted to remind our audience to please click the follow button to avoid missing any future episodes. If you would like to get in touch with me, I can be found on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search for CVG Solutions. Alternatively, you can email me at info@cvgsolutions.co.uk.